All right, good morning, everyone. Happy to be here in Vancouver. It's been a long week already for those that have been here for NANOG. So I'm John Sweeting, Senior Director of Registration Services, and I want to talk to you this morning, Policy Experience Report, but more specifically, the wait list that ARIN has. So the purpose of this briefing is to the community has to ultimately decide what to do, proposing change, removal of existing policy, proposing new policy. I'm going to give you some information and feedback on the current policy for the wait list, and then you can, hopefully there'll be some discussion about this because I think there needs to be. Also provide feedback on the number resource policy manual policies. So the policies we're going to review today are all part of the wait list policy. 418 is your unmet request, 4181 is the waiting list itself, and then 4182 is how we fulfill those unmet needs from the wait list to the people that are on the wait list. So this is a lot of text. It's straight out of the NRPM. It's the 418, and it's the unmet requests. It's a little bit dated because it talks about in the event that ARIN doesn't have a contiguous block of addresses to meet requests, when we all know we've run out of the free pool, so we just don't have that now. We actually, everything goes onto the wait list for people that are seeking IPv4 addresses. And there's some other words in there about, rules on when you can apply, how you can apply. You have to wait 3 months, which is a little, we're interpreting that to say that once you have received an allocation, you have to wait, or an assignment, you have to wait 3 months before you can come back and ask for it again. It's not quite what it says there, but that's how we have interpreted that, and that's how we're doing it today. So for the waiting list and fulfilling the unmet needs off the waiting list, we run it, the requests come in, we approve them or disapprove them, but the ones that are approved get added to the waiting list by the date and time they're approved. We then to fulfill those, anytime an address becomes available, it's matched to, you have like what you're really requesting and then what you would accept. So it could be you're requesting a 20, but you're willing to accept a 22. So if you're on the list and we have a 22, but we don't have a 20, we're gonna send you that 22. We're going to offer that 22 to you. If you accept it, you come off the wait list. If you don't accept it, then you come off the wait list today. So one of the, let's go. Okay, so some of the observations, I didn't want to start back then. Organizations are receiving addresses and then transferring them. 24% of the space issued has been transferred, mostly in the /16/17. We actually, since this slide deck, about a month and a half ago, was put together at the request of John for some review. We've actually had another 2/18s transferred that had been, one was 16 months and one was 18 months. So people they're getting on the wait list, they're waiting, getting filled, and then a year later, because that's in accordance with the policy, they're transferring those addresses. So the 1 year waiting period doesn't seem to have a whole lot of impact on people that want to come in and just get addresses to then enter the transfer market down the road. I could see, if it was a very small percentage, maybe that would be circumstances, but because it's such a high percentage and it's only the larger blocks, it seems like there's intent to use this policy not as I think the community intended. A a lot of organizations that are coming in to get on the wait list already have a substantial amount of space. And I can say, because I was on the AC when we came up with this policy, was that the intent was to have address space available for those people that either were new entrants or were smaller ISPs that didn't have like a ton of IPv4 address space already. It was to help sustain the smaller guys or the new entrants going forward. Yeah, as you can see, 4 organizations currently on the waiting list already have more than a /16 worth of space. And the majority are first-timers asking for smaller blocks. So in that sense, it's really working well. There's a lot of smaller ISPs. I think part of the thing that's happening today is the larger ISPs are telling new customers they can't provide them IPs or IPv4, or they're actually providing it but at a very high cost. So those smaller customers are coming in and requesting space and being put on the wait list. Yeah, so think of it this way: if somebody's on the wait list for a /16, a /16 becomes available, one company gets fulfilled. If it's 24s that they're looking for, that could be 256 smaller ISPs that get what they actually require. So continuing, blocks that are being transferred via 8.2 transfers that are probably specified recipient transfers. So that's just saying merger and acquisition transfers are happening that we really suspect are market transfers. So people go out, they make a company, they come in, they get on the wait list, they get their address space, and then they sell the whole company. Some of those, they sell, like this says, they sell a router and a customer base to a recipient. Our suspicion is that a lot of those are actually market transfers, not merger and acquisitions, but they follow the policy because they understand the steps they have to take to qualify for an 8.2. Also, the 24-month, again, it's very difficult for the Registration Services Department to look at someone that comes in asking for a 24-month supply. We have an officer has to verify that that is true and that they really do need that. That's fine most of the time, but for some of these companies that our shell companies, it's very easy to get an officer, the actual person that registered that company, to actually sign stating that they have a 24-month need for a /16. And again, we have at least one case where multiple large blocks were obtained by multiple organizations and then transferred via an 8.2 into a single organization. So that's, we do a lot of forensics and investigations today at RSD. We're not quite Law and Order or anything like that, but we do collect IP addresses that requests come in on, and we can tell when several different organizations are coming in for requests from the same IP or range. And that's part of our observations that brought me here today to bring this to your attention. And there's another, the merger and acquisition transfers are occurring while the organization on the waiting list, we don't have clear-cut policy that says that wait list doesn't transfer with the M&A. So it would be nice to have some clear-cut guidance on that. Basically, we try to revalidate that they're using all the space, but then we have the 8.2 policy that says we can't ask for needs or utilization of an 8-2 transfer. So we're kind of in a quandary there as well. So some relevant data that RSD has pulled together. 209 of 241 requests on the waiting list are for a /21 or smaller. So as you can see, the majority are pretty much what we would call legitimate and people in need. So one suggestion is imposing a /21 maximum would impact only 13% of the requests on the waiting list. So you could consider, maybe you want to limit that now, because right now there is no limit to how much space they can ask for and get put on the waiting list. And 5 of the 241 requests on the waiting list, 2% are for orgs that already have a /16 equivalent or more. So that could be another thing. You could impose a threshold on the amount of address space that an organization currently holds that is coming in and getting placed on the waiting list. So some of the questions that I hope we can discuss here, and you can give us some guidance and give the AC some guidance actually on these policies. Should a waiting list recipient be able to transfer the block they received ever? Or should maybe 12 months isn't long enough? Maybe it should be 5 years? Should an organization be eligible for the waiting list if that organization already has a substantial amount of space? That would be the, if you have like more than a /16, 15, 14, whatever the community thinks is the right number, they would not be able to go on the wait list. Should they be able to get multiple blocks on the waiting list? So we have had a few organizations that have already received 3 fulfillments on the waiting list. That's due to the waiting list is actually, as I said before, successful in, for the most part, in what the community was seeking to accomplish. And then some other questions. Should first-timers get priority? So new startups that don't have any space, should they have priority? And should a maximum block size be imposed? So some of the options: status quo, maintain the current waitlist approach. Other options: optimize the waitlist processing to better serve the ARIN community and ARIN's mission. Waiting list transfers, status quo, 1-year waiting period before the block can be transferred. The main issue, it creates a financial incentive for organizations to try and get as much space as possible so that they can then make some money on the transfer market. And anyway. Other options: disallow waiting list blocks from being transferred, as we do with 410 and 44 blocks, and disallow waiting list blocks from being transferred if the transaction is effectively a sale of addresses. So I think that's to say you have to consider an M&A. If it's an M&A, what would happen there with anything that was gotten off the wait list? Today with the 410 and 44, as long as they're going to be used for the same purpose, they can be transferred in an M&A. The waiting list block size, no maximum block size today. The main problems is evaluating. It takes time and presents other orgs from getting space. And was that the real intent of what we had for the wait list? And other options impose the maximum block size and would ensure more orgs can get space. The priority, we've gone over this too. The oldest request that can be filled is filled. Doesn't recognize that some need to be considered more justified than other. To me, this is a very difficult one because I don't know how registration services would be able to really fairly understand who needs it more than somebody else. So, but it's an option that's out there. And possibly there's another option: phase out the ARIN waiting list. Status quo would be we continue recovering space to fill the waiting list and distribute it using the waiting list. Other options: strengthen ARIN's ability to serve the community by utilizing recovered IPv4 resources to build an ARIN endowment or other worthy purpose, such as community grant programs, training programs, and others. This would significantly simplify ARIN number resource policy. Thank you.
Thank you, John. I'm actually going to handle the discussion. Okay, thank you, John. A round of applause for John, our head of registration services. We're going to wait for him to step safely out of the blast radius. Okay, microphones are open for questions. RS.
Rob Seastrom, Bike Grid, and ARIN AC. And I have a question, which is there are all sorts of anecdotal things that John just brought up, which is stuff that's happening that we may or may not want to be happening. What are those as a percentage of the total number of transactions?
Sure. Let's talk about it this way. First, if there is a case where we have evidence of number resource fraud, then we will correct it, okay? So the challenge is that the difference between something that looks suspicious and something that is provably fraud can be pretty great. So for example, you have someone who, in 3 different organizations, all happen to apply, all happen to get dress blocks, and then all happen to be acquired by the same entity. Can't prove that it's number resource fraud, but it looks highly suspicious. So when you ask about some of the questionable assignments, very little. In terms of total number of a handful, 2 or 3 that would be things that we consider questionable, but we can't show enough to issue fraud in terms of reclaiming the blocks.
Sure. To put a fine point on it, I'm interested in things that appear to be very pedantically adhering to the policies that we have in place with outcomes that we didn't really have in mind, not ones that are in the fraud grade.
So when you look then at number resources, however, okay, we have a number of cases where people are on the waiting list for 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, waiting for address space. They've said credibly they need it. They've shown that to RSD. Now you need this. You've proven you need these resources. You're waiting for 17. 14 months later, we say we have it available, and you have to show that you now need them. Well, any business that needed a /17 14 months ago is either out of business or found a way to get it, one or the other. By pure coincidence, we have people who have said, I needed it then, but by the way, I still need it now. I'm still growing to the point where I need it. And so you've got a little bit of disingenuous activity. People qualifying for the wait list that say they immediately need something generally go out and obtain it, but they may lease it from someone. That way they're not taken off the wait list. They might borrow someone's address space. So we have a whole number of creative endeavors people are doing to remain qualified to get this windfall of addresses. And the question that is really for the community is, did you intend the waiting list to be those people who didn't have any other means and might be unable to go to the market? Or did you intend it to be somewhat a lottery system where you sign up and you hope your number comes up?
And as a percentage of total
resources?
Transfers, forget the block size. As a number of total transactions as a percentage of that, is this a 2% thing, a 20% thing, a 70% thing?
Probably 10 to 20% of the transactions, 50 to 60% of the total /24 resources involved.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Kevin.
Kevin Bloomberg, The Wire. Those numbers that were shown by John on the very first slide are not a rounding error, they're significant, massively significant. Mm-hmm. My suggestion and hope is that the board suspends this policy until such time as the community can adequately address how it is being abused. Following policy and then transferring out space at 1 year and 1 day is not the intent and is just an abuse of our good nature as the community to make things fair. This issue of transferring out resources from free pools has happened in other regions and they've had to address this. We're now the suckers. We need to fix this, and I would suggest that that be done expeditiously.
Okay. Can you put the slides back up? We get to see how this is done, the magic screen that has all the presentations. Very good. Okay, oops. Okay, here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay. Dun, dun, dun. Okay. So for example, the question about suspension, okay? Generally, the board suspends policy when we believe it doesn't meet the function we don't do it very often, but if we really believe it no longer meets the requirements that the community put forth. The challenge with suspension is that there's a number of people who have waited months and are looking for a /24, for example, who, when you suspend the whole policy, you take the people who are getting the windfall and the people who have waited diligently, and you put them in the same category. Everyone loses as a result. Hence, the question that comes up is, given that, for example, at the bottom, of the 241 requests on the waiting list, 154 are requesting their first block ever, and 148 of those would accept a /21 or smaller. There's a number of parties who would accept a very modest-sized block and don't have any. If those are people who really don't have an effective alternative, when you suspend the policy, rather than amending the policy, you sort of put them in the process. What do you feel about that?
So if a scalpel or an amendment would fix the problem, again, I believe in these types of situations the board is best able to address this issue.
Okay.
I am perfectly fine with either, as long as the rampant, when I'm seeing these numbers, issue can be dealt with. Because now that this is out in the open, people are just going to start running towards dealing with this because they know they have time until that policies comes through in the community.
Understood. The good news, the one exception, I guess, for the waiting list policy compared to everything else, is if there's a run on the bank, they end up at the end of the line. So you actually can make a policy and implement it and affect those people who are queued. So there's a small benefit here, unlike other policies, where we actually have the ability, even if people were to say, oh my God, maybe this is a great opportunity for me, we won't be satisfying for them for some time. A policy change could easily affect those who got in the queue after today.
I guess, John, I was more referring to those that have received the space.
I see. Yeah. Got it. Okay. Center front.
Andrew Dahl, 8 Continents, ARIN AC. The thing that happened that we didn't anticipate, I think, is that we're getting more address space back into ARIN, and we expected that this excess address space would be transacted in the market. And so my suggestion, and I think at this point, is that we need to figure out either how to greatly limit the size and the destination of these, or we need to make them market transactions somehow.
Understood. Center front queue.
Allison Wood, State of Oregon, ARIN AC. To Kevin's point, are there any sanctions we can impose on the bad actors?
So we can. If I can show someone's a bad actor and I can defend it to the point of protecting ARIN, we can take the numbers back. Okay, we can absolutely take the numbers back. And in fact, for people who are curious, you endanger your number of resources with ARIN significantly if you engage in bad activity. But sometimes the difference between being able to call someone a bad actor versus a business that's growing and successful is very hard to discern. And the last thing you want to do is cause harm to a party that has no malfeasance, tend to be very careful there.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Owen, center front.
Owen DeLong, Sale Internet. I think that in terms of dealing with the ones that have already received addresses, especially the ones that have already transferred them, that horse has left the barn, so to speak, and that certainly suspending the policy is not going to do anything to them. Right. So if Mr.
They can
Bloomberg
no longer be addressed, is that what you're saying?
Right. If Mr. Bloomberg is attempting to deal with that issue through suspending the policy, I don't see how that works. In terms of the ongoing problem, I think it is appropriate that we consider amending the policy Ideally, there comes a day soon when we don't even care about this policy. V6 is the way to go. Come on, people. It's been 25 plus years. Get with the program. The good news is more than 50% of U.S. traffic is on V6 now, so we are making serious progress.
Final response at the back microphone. Go ahead.
Mike Burns, IP Trading. I'd like to make a statement about the last idea that was presented, where ARIN retained the essentially ownership of returned addresses for purposes of establishing an endowment or some other financial instrument. I just think that's a terrible idea. But
Okay.
my question is, and this goes to the idea of starving the waiting list by having addresses sold on the market rather than returned to ARIN. And the question is, where are these returned addresses coming from?
That's actually a great question. So I have the Department of Returned Addresses under me, amongst other things at ARIN. So addresses come back from a couple of purposes. One, if you do not pay your invoice, we start down a process that's on the website. You can go find it. And about 142 days later, your reverse DNS gets turned off. You've already received notarized letters. You've already received phone calls. If you still don't realize that your addresses are going away, we actually do reclaim them. And that's a small number, but it does happen.
Well, why don't you tell these people they can sell them?
We do, actually.
You do?
But the next category will truly boggle your mind. There's a small number of resources that are returned to ARIN. I don't need this anymore, ARIN, you can have it back. And we have a discussion with them about there's a market and there's people who know how to deal with this, and you really should find, and some people that I don't want to deal with that. What do I need to sign to return it? Yeah, I understand. That's why I said the second category is even more
I
amusing.
appreciate the effort. I
Okay?
shake my head.
And then there's a third one, and I just want to say, there are resources that have come back to ARIN through the chain of history, the last 20 years. Sometimes we can't determine who has the proper rights. Companies have merged or folded in a way that no one can see the agreements. Companies have gone defunct and simply disappeared with no party holding clear remnant interest or ongoing bankruptcy interest. And so we have resources that we scrub over time, and occasionally we'll say, okay, there really is no one who has a legitimate claim to these rights anymore. It really does look like it's defunct. And when we're sufficiently confident that we can issue them without harming someone, because if there's anyone who has a residual interest, I don't want to harm them. When we're really sure that we can issue them without harming anyone, then they're marked available, and they end up going right now into this waiting list policy. So you'll see a few of those being released.
So you have a team in ARIN dedicated to that process?
That's in the priorities of things to do, that's the bottom one. When someone's not answering your requests and answering help desk phones or anything else, they're trying to dig up and clean these. It's not a huge priority.
What about a process for people like me, like brokers who uncover abandoned blocks?
Oh, brokers, you guys handle people's address blocks on your
Yeah,
own.
we do
I
it all
don't-
the time, but is there a provision for us notifying ARIN when there's a case where, like you've described,
Yes.
we can find nothing?
Yes, you can, if you believe an address block has truly been abandoned and has a defunct organization, email RSD or email myself, we'll look at it.
Is there any information about the volume of these, retaking of addresses? I mean, how often does it occur? Is that something that, you're pushing for, driving those recoveries?
So, if you want to know, do we have a list of address blocks that we see absolutely no activity on, can't see any valid rights holder, and that haven't shown up in the routing table? Yes. If you ask the second question, does that mean that they're not being used by someone who's the rightful successor holder, successor of rights? We don't know that, because quite frankly, companies merge and it ends up in a lab somewhere and it never gets routed, or it's being used internally, but it's not showing up in a public routing table. So the fact that we know about potential isn't a good indication of how many of those might actually be defunct, if that helps.
Well, and it's a very strenuous effort to try and really get to the point where your legal team can say, yeah, this is absolutely abandoned, no one else is going to come after us. And it's hard and it's time-consuming. I just, didn't know
Hard
if
and
Aaron's staff-
time-consuming, not a top priority, but they do come up now and then. If you'll notice, we just did an issuance from the waiting list a month ago before this meeting. Some of those were resources that had been clearly returned or resources that have been clearly revoked, and some resources that we had determined really had no successor in rights.
Thanks.
Okay, probably more than you want to know, but gives you an idea. Okay, last question, go ahead.
Good morning, Alan Shackelford, Johns Hopkins University. In this room, actually the back half of this room, on Tuesday, I was offered $1.2 million for one of my class six, did I hear you say you'd rather do that than me send it back to you?
Oh, so let's be clear. We will not refuse address space, but we will tell you so that you and your organization are 100% clear that you have rights. You may not have freely held property, but you have an interest. You have actual rights to an entry in the registry. It's transferable, there's a market, and you can do it. It's fairly important that we're upfront and clear about this, and that the party we're dealing with actually has the rights to return those to ARIN. We deal with company officers on this matter. We don't want someone to say, oh, my sysadmin gave away my /16 the other day and he wasn't authorized. So we're very upfront, we're very vocal to make sure you understand. Even then, we have parties that say it's just easier to give it back to ARIN. You don't have to give it back to ARIN, you can go to the marketplace. We just want to make sure you're 100% informed of your choice.
Okay.
Got it? Okay.
John.
Steve Ryan, ARIN's
yeah,
general counsel.
I just want to make a general point, and we don't do this all the time, but I want to give an antitrust admonition to the room. When we rise, if you don't give your specific corporate plan or a specific offer, no offense taken, by the way, but we're not here, we're here to talk about public policy with regard to it, not any particular company's decision-making. And it is important, by the way, and the entire ARIN structure exists so that we can have these public meetings as an exception to the antitrust law. We have all of the ISPs and end users in North America are welcome at this meeting to discuss these issues and to actually make standards about them. And our right to do that legally depends on us doing it in a manner like this. And again, maybe sometimes we should do this more generally, but if you could avoid talking about a particular company's name, et cetera, it's always helpful. Thank you.
Excellent reminder. Thank you.